fellow crafters, I'm Karen, and in this video I'll be showing you how to make this string art of a bonsai tree. String art is one of my favorite crafts to do. It always seems to turn out a really neat final product, and the process is fun too. You get to pick out colors because you're essentially drawing a picture, and there are tons of shades of colors in embroidery floss, so there are a lot of choices there. And you also get to feel a little bit like you're building something because you got the whole hammer and nails piece going. So for this one, you're going to need the materials and tools that are up on the screen. Pretty standard for a string art here. So you're going to need your embroidery floss. I'm just going to be using 2 shades of brown for the trunk and 2 shades of green for the leaves, and then a couple colors to do our little dish that's holding the whole plant. Beyond that, you'll just really need the board that you're going to use. So I'm going to be using an 18-inch diameter pine round. I thought the bonsai would look really neat on a circle as opposed to something that's more square or rectangular. And then you'll need your nailing supplies, so your tack hammer, some nails, and a pair of pliers to hold them. It's up to you if you wanted to do any finishing work on your board. I'm not planning on it, so I don't need to have any stain or paint for this project. Whenever I try to do something that's an imitation of something that already exists, I do a lot of research to make sure that I can capture the essence of that design. So for this, I looked at pictures of actual bonsai trees, and then I looked at artwork of bonsai. So you may look for paintings or drawings or sketches, anything that gets you sort of an idea of what an artist will do with the original concept and turn it into the art. So in all of that research, I'm looking for the trends and the patterns that I notice about the design. So for a bonsai tree, it's very often short and squat, about as wide as it is tall, as opposed to like a normal tree that you might think of being really tall, but not so wide. The trunk is very commonly twisted or curving, and the whole thing is very often leaning or asymmetrical, or just sort of not your straight and narrow traditional tree. And the leaf groupings are usually pretty distinct. In a lot of the artwork, you'll find them in odd numbers, so that's pretty common, with a single one at the top and sort of balanced ones on either side. Very often groups of 3 or groups of 5, and they're usually potted in some sort of dish because they're small. So as I'm observing these patterns, I'm getting an idea of what I want mine to look like. And once you have that idea sort of formed, then you can go on to the sketching phase. This large bonsai tree that I have drawn here as my final sketch is actually my 3rd rendition of this tree. The first one I did was a much smaller version, and I was just sort of sketching a bunch of different bonsai trees to get a feel for which one I liked the look of the most. So that's what this one looks like. It's small. I really like my original drawing, and then I scaled it up to sort of a medium size, and I was originally planning on using that with a grid to scale it up to the full size, but I didn't like my medium drawing as much as I liked my small drawing, so I decided in the end to make the large drawing by hand rather than trying to scale up the medium one. I recommend that you draw the trunk first, and that's because it helps define the shape for the rest of it. So you don't want to draw it too large because you don't want the trunk to take up too much space, but you do want it to be sort of the driving force behind the overall shape. And I personally found it helpful to kind of think of it as almost like a cartoon of a dancer, because it seemed to help me get the idea of how it should move fluidly, but still kind of have that natural look. And then I went on to drawing the leaf groupings, which I found actually to be hard for some reason, to make it look like a good picture without being too round, without being too angular. So the happy medium that I sort of ended up at was to think of it as like a miniature mountain range. So there are like peaks at the top of a lot of my leaf groupings, and then round it out sort of like a cloud. And overall, I noticed that a lot of the groupings tend to be wider and not very tall, so sort of like squatty, and not like, not very vertical. So after that, I had to scale up my sketch to a larger paper, and I decided to use parchment paper for this because I thought it would be big enough, and it turned out it wasn't. It was a little bit shy, so I had to use some tape to attach a couple of pieces, but of course tape doesn't stick very well to parchment paper, so I had to use some staples to reinforce that. So if you have big paper, use big paper, but I do find that the parchment paper is helpful because you can see through it. So you can set it down on top of the board and see where your edges are. But before that, after I had taped, I marked boundaries of where I wanted to draw, and I didn't mark the size of my board. My board is 17.5 inches in diameter, but I marked 15.5. And I had noted that when I was sketching things, I tended to draw and like run out of space just a little bit, and you don't want it to be too tight to the edges because it'll look cramped. So I drew it smaller, and then of course I exceeded my space anyways, but it still fits within the size of my board, and I'm happy with the drawing. So that might be helpful to you to mark a smaller area, or if you're finding that the opposite is true, you could mark a larger area, and then if you're drawing really small within that, it'll probably still fill the board well. So the scaled up drawing was basically the same process as everything smaller. I started with the trunk, added the leaves, sort of fine-tuned things, and made decisions about how I wanted it to look, and then ended up with the final product. And that whole process from researching to all 3 sketches that I did took me about 2.5 hours, so it was a pretty significant amount of time. So don't feel bad if it's taking a while and you want to get on to the fun stuff. Before we put in the nails, we have to secure our paper to the board. So what I'm going to be doing now is cutting sort of close to the edge of the circle. It doesn't have to be perfect, but close. And then I'm going to be using tape, and since my parchment paper is a little fussy, maybe some rubber bands to sort of secure it in place. And then after that, we can start putting the nails in. So that's the final taped product, and I decided not to use the rubber band. I may add it later if I have any issues while I'm nailing, but I just put 8 pieces of tape around the outside, and I tried to pull the parchment paper so it was nice and flat as I was working. So I was pulling it towards the outer edge where I was taping, and I'm just going to have to keep an eye on this tape to make sure that it doesn't come up on me, but I think I'm in good shape now so that I can go ahead and move on to the nailing. I'm going to be using wire nails. I prefer them over brads because they have a nicer head that holds the string in place. And these are 19 by 1/2 inch. This is a standard size that I use for all of my string arts. And I recommend a tack hammer. It's smaller and a little bit easier to wield than a larger hammer. And during this nailing process, there are a few things that you want to think about. So I recommend that you use pliers, needle nose pliers, or just anything that can hold the nail in place while you hammer so you don't have to worry about your fingers. You'll want to probably do this while standing if you can. It allows you to look straight down at the nail and make sure that they're not going in crooked. Inevitably, you're going to have some crooked nails, but for the most part, you want to get them as straight as possible from the beginning. Also, you want to make sure that they're going into an even height or an even depth in the wood, depending on how you want to think about it. That will help your final product not to look like it's got different layers of nails in it. And then just as a couple of practical things, I'm going to be using some quilting batting actually, and this is just going to protect my table a little bit. So I've used craft foam before. Anything that you want to put down just to dull the hammering sound. You're going to be hammering for a while, so that will help a little bit for the sound. And then work from the center outward. You'll find, or you could work from like a side to another side, but you want to make sure that you're doing it somewhat systematically so you don't get sort of trapped and find that, oh, you got to do the middle now, but it's really hard to get to. So with those principles in mind, we're going to put in nails, and I haven't marked where I'm going to put the nails exactly. I usually put them about a 1/2 inch, maybe 3/8 of an inch apart. The key is that anywhere where the string's going to need to change directions, so like those mountain peaks at the top of our little leaf groupings, or anywhere where the trunk changes directions or where the dish has a corner, those are definitely going to need nails because you can't make a corner without actually having a corner point nail. And you just want to have them not so close together that you're not going to be able to get your string in there, but not too far apart that you won't have a distinct picture when you're done. So you'll get a feel for it, but again, that 3/8 to 1/2 inch rule is a good general idea. We're just going to nail right through the paper, and then we'll tear off all the paper when we're done. Once you're done with the nailing process, you're going to want to go through with a pair of tweezers and try to pull out any of those little tiny bits of paper that get stuck between the nail and the board. It won't take too long. I only had about a dozen, and I think I did 376 nails, so it's a pretty small percentage of the nails that have an issue. You want to hang on to those tweezers because they're going to be your best friend in the stringing process, and that's because when you get to the point of tying off the strings, you're often in a very tight little area, and it's hard to move your fingers or even get the embroidery floss to move in a way that you can knot it around the final nail. So hang on to those tweezers, but make sure that if you're using really fine or sharp ones, that you're really careful not to do any damage to the string. I have occasionally sort of cut through it with the tweezers, and then you have to backtrack a little. So the general process is that you're going to start with whatever color you want to work with, and tie it off to one of the nails. I usually try to choose a sort of inconspicuous place so that you don't see the end of the string anywhere. And you'll tie just a simple knot to the nail. I always add a dab of hot glue just because I don't want to risk it ever falling apart. And then you'll want to run the string around the area that needs to be that color. So I typically don't do any sort of pattern. I will just do basically triangles. So you'll move the string so that you get some big triangles, some small triangles, and you're just trying to fill in the area without leaving any gaping holes or without having it look too dense. So you'll get a feel for what that looks like and where you have to move the string to fill in those places. A design like this is actually, I think, going to be fairly easy because it's very curved. There are nails all over the place, and it should be pretty easy to find a nail that will fill in any gap that I have. I'm going to be starting with the darker shades, so I have 2 shades of brown for the trunk, 2 shades of green for the leaves, and then a red for the dish with the black stripe that I left there. So I typically put the darker color in the back and the lighter color on top because you get a brighter overall picture, but it's totally up to you. And you could just do them in solid colors if you wanted to keep it more simple. I like to do that two-tone because it makes it look a little bit fancier. The last thing that I would say is that you want to outline the whole picture as you're going. So, for example, if you do an area of the green, go around with the last part of your string, and I always do this at the end so that it's the topmost part of the string, and outline the outside of that area that's that color. If you're using 2 shades, I wouldn't do it in both colors, but pick whichever one you want to be the outline. In my case, it'll probably be the lighter green because that's going to be the top color overall. And as you're doing that, you want to make sure that the string is staying on the outside of the nails. You'll find that you can control whether the string is on the inside of the nail or the outside of the nail. And it looks better if that outline is sort of the outer boundary of the picture as opposed to all of those little nail heads. So that brings this one to a close. I made a couple of mistakes, just not remembering quite where my trunk was supposed to be or where the leaves were supposed to be, but nothing critical and nothing that I think anyone would really notice. So I'm all set with this one. Thanks for supporting Tickled Fancy Crafting by watching this video. This content is available on YouTube and Rumble, so click the like or Rumble button to let me know that you enjoyed the content, and subscribe to see new Tickled Fancy Crafting videos in your feed. If you'd like to be informed directly about the content, ring the notification bell on YouTube or adjust your notification settings on Rumble. Comment with crafts that you would like to see in the future, and remember, you can make this.